Hi, Armin.
Hi, Johannes. Good evening.
Good
Good to
evening
see
to
you
you.
again.
Always a pleasure. It was a cold days, the last days, but now it's very warm again. Very
Except in
pleasant
this
to see.
room. This room is really chilly.
Oh, yes? Oh,
Yes, it's an
okay.
old house. It's terrible. Anyway,
Okay. Anyway, this evening we're gonna talk about quite some topics, but they're all intertwined like the whole I Ching.
yes.
And the topics are, and I'm going to read it on my phone, like how to combine hexagram and text when working with the G, because we had some questions about text and just images. And we want to discuss that also with a case that we're going to discuss. And how does the G reply with images? What are images? And what is the difference between hexagram and text? And there is a comment from a certain David that we're gonna discuss. And how do we work with the answers from the G? How do we extract meaning from it? And personal experiences, methods, approaches, and we're gonna do that with hexagram 47 from
Yes.
an other person. And we do some examples how you work with the images and the text. How does that sound?
Yes, sounds very good. I think this podcast will last about 4 hours or so.
Uh,
There's so much to
Probably,
cover here,
yeah.
but they're all, as you said, they're all related to each other. Because the question that we received from one of our viewers is if we wanted to share our thoughts on how to integrate looking at trigrams with and without the text. How do you combine a hexagram interpretation with text interpretation? And that actually has to do with how you think the I Ching answers. How do you think? How does the I Ching and also oracles in general? How do they answer
Mhm.
questions? So, and that brings us to all the other topics that you just mentioned.
Okay. Let us start with a comment that we got from a viewer about the text and hexagrams. Is that
Yeah, you mean the comment from David?
yeah, the comment of David?
Yes.
So we can
Yeah.
discuss that further, and then we go on and combine it with everything.
Yes, is good. Yes, David sent us very interesting thoughts, his ideas about how he looks at the word text. We talked in the first podcast about text, working with text, etc. And he said, actually, he asked, how do we define the word text? And he says, for me, your podcast is a text, albeit a spoken text that is mostly improvised. However, it is a recording and I can now use it in the same way I can use a text. A hexagram is an image rather than a text, question mark. And when I began reading the I Ching or I Ching, he says, it would have been great if I had seen this podcast first. Yeah, story of my life, David. I'm always running behind the times. I understand the idea of poetic imagery, and I have always read the text with some aesthetic license in mind. No, that's not bad, I think.
Mhm.
However, he says, the hexagrams without commentary still qualify as a form of text. Hexagram lines speak in the same way as a diagram expresses meaning, and to me they are diagrammatic. A diagram is a form of text, and he also says text is a multi-dimensional concept. So a few things that I would like to mention here that he says here. He says a hexagram is an image rather than a text. Well, a hexagram contains an image and the text also contains an image. So they actually do the same thing. And that in that way, there isn't really any difference between a hexagram and a text. However, a hexagram is not the same as text. I mean, a hexagram, that's this figure of 6 lines and it's made up of trigrams, and a lot is happening in that hexagram. But the text contains words, or in Chinese, they contain characters, and they are put together to make sentences and stories, etc. So they don't. They are not the same, but they have the same function as far as I'm concerned. David says that hexagrams without commentary still qualify as a form of text. I think I understand what he means. I don't entirely agree with that, because a hexagram, because it is a figure of 6 lines, it is not text. Text is mainly formed by words and has another way of conveying the message. And a diagram, he says, is a form of text. And I think, no, it's not really the same. They have the same function, hexagrams, diagrams, pictures, etc. But it's not exactly the same. But this actually has to do with how you view, what your view is of the answer of the I Ching. And I think most users of the I Ching, they forget or don't know or don't realize that an oracle and that I Ching speaks through images. They tend to see the words, and they tend to focus on the words, but they don't see the larger picture. So they focus on the trees and they don't see the forest.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me of something that Tsun Tse, or in your words, how do you pronounce it? Tsun Tse?
Juicy, is that
Yep.
from Juicy? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that words exist because of meaning. Once you got the meaning, you can forget the words. And it's the same about the images. If you got the principle, it's okay. But they are interlocked with each other. But words are only stuff to get to the images. If you got the images, you go to the principles. But so they are one. Can we say it like that?
Yeah, definitely. They share the same function. And I thought that in Adam Schwartz, he is writing a series of articles about the names of the 8 trigrams.
Interesting.
Why do these trigrams have certain meanings associated with them? And in his latest article, which deals with trigram Earth, he says, and this actually shows how he thinks that oracles like the I Ching came to be. He says diviners observed images in the divination result and attached words, hexagram names, injunctions, and predictive statements, so as to clarify whether or not the issue under inquiry was fit for use and considered to be auspicious and favorable, or unfit for use and considered to be inauspicious and unfavorable. In the 1930s, Yuxing Wu, philologist and paleographer, he said in the introduction to his Shuangjian Yi I Ching Xinjiang, he says that images in the changes mainly originated and developed in resemblances between real objects and logographs, Chinese characters, I think he means, and their associated hexagram and trigram pictures. The changes, he declared, is a study of images. And the articles from Adam, they deal with, well, where do the images come from? Why are certain images, certain metaphors associated with specific trigrams? But it's all images, images.
Yep.
And that is something that you, I think, have to realize when you're working with an oracle like the I Ching. And as far as I know, almost every oracle in China uses this principle of xiang, of image. And for instance, you have the Wang Jiatai Gui Zhang, which is also a hexagram oracle. And it uses historical anecdotes as images. So it constantly refers to either real events or legendary events, and talks about Huangdi and other famous people, and refers to a specific event in that person's life and uses that as an image. And you have to see the image in either when you work with I Ching in the hexagram and in the text. And I think that is what a lot of people don't seem to realize.
Why not?
Yeah, the problem here is that we are working mainly with translations. And also, all translations, well, almost all translations come with commentary.
Yep.
And most users who start with I Ching, they read all the text. They read, for instance, the line texts of the moving lines, and immediately they read the commentary. And when they read the commentary, they forget the images that are actually in the text. They never learn to stick with the image in the text because they're mainly working with the commentary from the translator. I think that's a habit that a lot of viewers can relate to, that they are used to read the text of the I Ching and immediately with the commentary, but the commentary does not contain images.
No, absolutely. Sometimes it does, but the old commentary, the true commentary,
Yeah,
from the I Ching, it
yeah,
has a
exactly.
lot of images, and we're gonna discuss that a little bit further.
Yeah,
But what do you think about, because there's also a big difference between a Western language and, of course, Chinese language. Chinese language is made out of pictograms, is made of images.
yes, yeah,
And we are bound in our language, in the Western language, with what comes first and then comes second. And the Chinese language is, I believe, far more in context. What does
yes,
a certain character mean in context? So,
yeah. Well, and
he,
that, I often get this question about either on Facebook or through mail, that people ask me, what does this character mean? They send me one single character and they ask me, what does this character mean?
Mhm.
I can't answer that question if I don't know the context,
No, and this is
because
great.
without context, character can have a lot of meanings.
So, in because Jijing, of course, comes from China, or that state of mind, in everything is connected. Also in language. So, if you don't know the context, there is no answer.
No, exactly. And that is also how the I Ching works.
Yeah.
Without context, a hexagram can mean anything. So I often say, this is one of my pet peeves, one of my hobby horses. I often say, when you get the same hexagram 3 times, you have 3 different answers. And
Okay.
so there are people who really get outraged when I say that. They say, no, that's not true. Yeah, because hexagram 3 means difficulty at the beginning, and that's what it means. And if you're going to tell me that it means something different with each question, then I'm lost.
Yep.
So they need structure, they need guidance, but it is mainly the situation or the question that defines the context for the
Yep.
answer of the I Ching.
Absolutely. And it's the same.
So
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
and that's the same with the Chinese language. I mean, a Chinese character. I mean, you have the character "ko," which means mouth, but it's also used for many other meanings. And I think the Hanji Datsurgeon dictionary contains more than 30 meanings for this simple character.
No.
So I need to know the context when you ask me about the meaning of a character. And I remember that sometime a few years ago, someone asked me about the meaning of a character, and I immediately asked, okay, what is the context? And he replied, there is no context. And I thought, what the hell? Did this character drop out of the sky? No, it didn't. You found it somewhere. And where you found it, that's part of the context.
Yeah.
So Chinese characters don't appear suddenly, but even if they did, then that is the context. There is always context. So, and that's the same for working with I Ching. There's always context to which you have to relate the answer of
And the
the.
same with working with texts, because you had a question. How does the question relate to the text you receive if you're only looking at the I Ching, the old texts? Let's go into that deeper, because trigrams, for me, images are more free. They
Yes.
have so much more liberation. Uh, let's go to the question we received from one person. Can you? No, I can share the screen. Or do you want to say something more further on now?
I can always say more about this, about his
Of course.
stuff, etc.
It's
But
going to be a
so
long podcast, but
yeah. Now let's just start with this case, and this case
yeah.
gives us, I think, enough option or opportunities to touch on several other
Okay,
points as
I
well.
can
So
also start with the question because I
yeah.
also have the. Let me share my screen with this question. Okay, do you see my image now, Harman?
Yes, I see your not the presentation. It's yes, that
Okay,
now
okay,
that
yeah,
yes, this
no,
is
no,
working. Excellent.
no. Okay,
It's
okay, okay.
white now, but
Okay. We received a question, and it was a bigger question, also around the text and images. But the true question was, why do my partner and I fight all the time?
yes, that was the
Be-
question she asked to the I Ching, and she
No.
actually she's a student of mine, and she learned from me how to look at trigrams and other parts of the hexagram and pretend as if there isn't any text. So, but I also have another course in which we do the other way around, which we only focus on the text and pretend as if there isn't any hexagram. And her question is actually, well, so, with this example, how do I combine these two methods?
Yes, I'm going back to the recording because something very strange happened, Harman. The moment I showed this picture, what we gonna discuss, hexagram 47, immediately our connection was broken.
Okay.
Viewers will not see it, but it was completely gone.
Okay.
And for me, if you ask me, how do I fly onto hexagrams? What happens when I learn a hexagram? When I look at a hexagram? And this is something very, very interesting.
It's a
Immediately,
sign, Johannes. It's a sign.
it's a sign. It's a
Yeah.
sign. It's about disconnecting. That's the first thing that we get from this stuff. But
Yes.
okay, how do I fly on a hexagram? How do I interpret it? And then we go to the textual images and the text of it. Let's go to the question again.
Yes.
Okay, why do my partner and I fight all the time? Well,
Yes, because Johannes, do you have a general approach when you are going to interpret a hexagram from the I Ching, or is it
I,
just
I find
more
it a
freestyle?
very difficult question, Harman, because everything is already inside of my mind and heart, and I just see a hexagram and I think, okay. But I tried to break it down in levels.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what I'm going to do right
Yes.
now. My general approach is just look at the trigrams and what they feel like. So we have a lake above, we have water below. So there's a lot of water going on because a lake has also water inside of her, but it's dripping away. It's going away. How does it feel? That's my first approach. How does a hexagram feel? I feel loneliness in this hexagram because, due to trigram water. And also, when water is drying out from a lake is not abundant anymore. It cannot feel joy anymore. Yeah? So firstly, I look at the trigrams and what I feel. And then I look at what the movements of the trigrams are. Are they going the same direction or intertwine? And in this case, water is going way faster down than the lake. Lake can go, in my opinion, two directions because it's so sensitive. But it mostly go up because yeah, it's not a young trigram, but the lower trigram of the lower line of the thing is young, so it wants to go up, but water wants to go down. And that means that relationships, resonances in a hexagram, they're not very strong. In fact, they're poor. What are resonances? The first and the fourth line, so the bottom line of the lower trigram and the bottom line of the upper trigram, they have a connection. If there is a yin-yang connection or a yang-yin connection, I would say there is resonance. So that means they are connecting. In this case, okay, there is, they can be friends again, but it's a long way in this hexagram because the question was asked by some person, and that's a lower trigram, and he's way down in the water, way down in the feelings, way down in being locked up. I cannot reach the other person, but there is a certainty they can reach each other, but well, we get to that some later, but it's like being in the dark because it's trigon water. It's like being in the cold in the winter, like being in an old cave, being in a cave in your own because of the lowest line in yourself, because there is isolation in this whole thing. But there is connection.
Okay.
They can work it out if they really want to. But we go to that. Then I look to line 2 and 5 because there's also a relationship between that. And then we see yang and yang. Yang and yang is second best, but they're both quite strong in their opinions. They want to talk, they want to say, they want to, yeah, I don't know. Young is quite rational. So when they fight, I think it's not really an emotional fight. It's more or less about who's wrong, who's right. It's more rational. So you got 2 points of the same coin, and they can work it out again. They want the same, but the two trigrams are drifting away from each other. So the connection is not very strong. And then we get 3 and 6, and this is a poor combination. Yin and yin. Yin and yin is antagonistic. It's like putting two magnets on each other with the minus. It
Okay,
pulls each
they are
other
pushing each
away.
other away.
They're pushing each other away on the Shen level, on the thinking level.
Okay.
But what's going on further? Then I look at the nuclear trigrams, and then we see fire below and wind above. Why? Don't mind the black dots for now. The second, third, and fourth line is always the lower nuclear trigram, and the third, fourth, fifth line, the above nuclear trigram of the nuclear hexagram, and then we get hexagram 37, if I'm not mistaken. And that's called in English, I guess, family.
Yes.
Would you agree? Okay, so there is exhaustion and oppression in the family. So there is something going on because hexagram, the family says everything about uh, uh, put everybody on the right place. This is my place. This is your place. But trigram water, oh, it really wants to be independent. It must be independent. And trigram lake is all about the things I want to say, the skulls and whatever, but it's also quite independent. So it has a lot of things to do also with nuclear hexagram, with communication, not listening, because fire has to do with connecting with each other. And I said it in our former podcast, when the fire is out of balance, because it is out of balance. I will come to that later on. Uh, it cannot say the true things in the right time and to the right person. It has problems with that. Trigon wind is all about communication on the same level. It means being harmonic, being go and adjust. But this answer of this person is very much problemized with that, with the fire content. But there is hope in this, but they will go through their own dark moments. Trigram water, their own loneliness. What's happening in this trigram when we use the Bao T, for example? So we have fire to third, fourth line. And what trigram do we have as Bao T?
It's trigram water again. Interesting.
Trigram water again. And what does trigram water do with the fire?
Oh dear.
If we use the Wu Xing?
Well, I think that water will try to extinguish the fire.
So there might be a lot of fears or things going on, what makes it very difficult in this situation to get along or to get connection. But both of them are, I think, quite rational. They come with a lot of stuff with, this is my truth. It's not going to work. I would advise these persons just to write it down. Do not use your mouth, because trigram wind in the nuclear hexagram is also wood, and paper is made of wood. Write it down.
Okay.
Don't talk so much. Write it down and write it on your own hearth, and not you're so bad or whatever, but what's hurting you inside. That's asking this nuclear trigram, but it's being attacked by the water, by the fears. Interesting though is that we see a nuclear trigram above, and then we see yin, yang, yang. So trigram wind, and let's interlock by again.
Oh dear. Another trigram water.
Yep. But water produces wood.
Okay.
So if these persons would learn to teach about their fears and to write it down and to talk about that, why are they arguing so much? Because there is so much fear in the system, in your own system, the one who put the coins down. Try to talk about that, or even better, write it down and then just send it to another person. Send it, give it to another, instead of argue all the time.
Okay.
Because there is some interesting interlocking, because when they do give their fears away on a letter or just say it, it enhances the trigram wind, wood, and
Okay.
that enhances fire. So there can be interconnection. And
Okay.
I will break it down a little bit further and then I shut up. I also bring then a little bit further the nuclear hexagram, and then we will get from hexagram 37 family, then we will get a hexagram 64. So this is the deepest core of this question. And 64 is all about renewance from chaos. So this chaos, this everything what's going on, okay, they want to rebuild something new. And this is how I fly on a hexagram in a little nutshell, Harmon.
Okay, good. So this is your interpretation of the hexagram.
Yep.
And our viewer wants to know how to connect the hexagram with the text. And so far you have looked at the hexagram and all its
Yep.
parts, and we more or less decided that I was going to look at the text. So
Yep.
I did. But I also would like to talk about the short interpretation that this person gave of the hexagram, because it actually shows a little bit why she is struggling with combining the hexagram with the text. And then we can go from her interpretation, we can go look at the text. Is that a good idea?
Very good idea.
Okay.
Please share your screen.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. You have to stop sharing your screen now.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Otherwise,
yeah.
it's not working.
Okay, I must go to the very okay.
And let me see, where is, oh, there it is. And so, okay. This is her own interpretation of the trigrams, and also then she says a tiny bit about the text. But she says about the trigrams, this lower trigram is me and the upper trigram is my partner. Yeah, that's a good approach as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing wrong with that. But then she says interpreting these trigrams will come up with a totally different answer than the text itself. Debatable. We're going to talk about that. Lake has to do with taking it easy, be joyful, relax, enjoying the nice things of life. Fine with that. Water, the lower trigrams, going independently without any firm goal in mind. There might be lots of unconscious motives and also fears within me, etc. There's nothing wrong with her short interpretation here. I can live with that. So, but what she probably doesn't realize that these two things that she just described actually answer her question. Why my partner and I fight all the time? Well, because of this. Because the different approaches that these two people have in the relationship. So, and these few sentences already give the answer. But then she's struggling with the text, because she says when consulting the text, though, it gives us the image of exhaustion, entrapment. And I thought, yeah, well, that's just the name of the hexagram. But there's more to it. The text is more than just the name. And I thought, you are making a good start with saying that it's exhaustion, which is also part of the answer why my partner and I fight all the time. But there's more to it. And for some reason, she doesn't mention the rest of the judgment text. And she didn't have any moving lines. That's what she explicitly states in the first sentence, lake over water, no changing lines. Which means that we can look at the judgment text, and the judgment text is more than just this single label of exhaustion or entrapment or whatever you want to call it. So she also says, in hindsight, that was very accurate representation of our situation. A few days after I threw the hexagram, I got extremely sick and exhausted. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but it doesn't in any way relate to your question or your situation. Because your question was why my partner and I fight all the time. And the fact that you got sick is might be related to your situation, but what you're saying here does not answer the question. You're simply saying, well, I got extremely sick and exhausted, and that is relatable to Hexagram 47. I can agree with that, but then you have to take it further. If you're going to relate that you being sick, and you're going to relate that to Hexagram 47, then how does that relate to your relationship and to this question? And she doesn't connect all these parts. So, and I think that is mainly what she's struggling with. And I think a lot of people who use I Ching are struggling with this. How are you going to interpret the text? And the funny thing, though, is that one of my other students, he said that after taking your online courses about working with the hexagram triangles and working with the text of the E, I've been exploring working with the images and their meanings. And he says, so far I have not found any fixed way that text and hexagram work together. And he says, but so far there is nothing that does not further working with both. So if I interpret his message correctly, he also thinks that it is not possible to connect hexagram interpretation and text interpretation. And I wonder, where does he get that idea from? And I also think, where did I go wrong in my workshops? Because if you learn how to work with the hexagram and you learn how to work with the text, then why are you struggling with combining the two? Because hexagram and text, as we said, they do the same thing. And for some reason, many people think that the hexagram and text, that they clash, but they never clash.
No.
You know, every part of an answer can contain the complete answer. You can work with a hexagram and completely ignore the text. That's fine. You can work only with the text and do nothing with the hexagram. That's also fine. You know, you have this technique with the holograms in glass. And when you have this hologram in glass, in a glass plate, and when you smash that hologram in pieces, then each part, each piece also contains the complete hologram. And maybe you have to look at it from different angles to see the complete picture, but every piece of the smashed hologram also contains the complete hologram. And that's how I see the I Ching. You don't need to use all the parts of the answer. You can leave out a certain part because you will still have a complete answer.
When you see it, you see it.
What did you say, Johannes?
When you see it, you see it.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
whole. It's whole.
Yeah, yeah.
But texts are sometimes so more important for persons and get more, oh, this is so strange for me, and I get very anxious about it. That's what I learned from my students. Well, throw away the text then.
Yeah, exactly.
Just look at the images.
You have a choice. And if for some reason the text doesn't resonate with you, it's completely fine to leave it out.
Yeah,
so that I mean, that's what I did in China. The oldest way of using the I Ching is actually the Shangshu method, where you completely don't put the text aside. Wen Wang Gua is a method of using the I Ching without text. Mai Hua Yishu, plum blossom numerology, is a method to use the I Ching without text. And there are more methods to use the I Ching without text. So it is possible to work with the I Ching without text. And the other side is also true. You can use the I Ching without looking at the hexagram. But in this case, this person who sent me this message, as well as the lady whose case we are discussing, they're struggling with combining these two. So, but the two always work together. And if you don't accept that, then you are in deep shit. Because then you are going to doubt your own interpretation. Then you're going to
intuition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but they always work together. So let's look how at the text of Hexagram 47 and how it can combine with your interpretation of the hexagram, the trigrams, etc. Because really the text doesn't ever clash with hexagram interpretation. It always is a good addition to the hexagram interpretation.
I agree totally.
And in this case, she focused only on the name of the hexagram. And maybe she was thinking also, well, lake is a positive trigram. It has to do with joy, etc. And now I get this hexagram which is named exhaustion. So maybe that is also creating a clash in her head. I don't know. But
let us say something about trigram lake. Yes, it's joy, but when joy and all the water is gone, it's fragile. It's broken metal. So it's depression.
Yeah, exactly. That is also something that Wilhelm says somewhere in his translation. He describes Trigram Lake as being joy, but when the lake doesn't receive fresh water, it becomes stale and nothing can live in it, and it becomes a depression.
Yeah, of course.
So I think every trigram has two of these sides.
Mm-hmm.
So
but this is a great question between people of students. Yeah, but it means like this. No, you have to see it in the context. Again, back in text.
Yeah. But students often think, what is it? Is it joy or is it depression? It can't be both. Yes, it can be both.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's look at the text. And I decided to mainly actually to work with the Chinese original text. I first was considering using one of the many translations that I have, but in this case, the text of the judgment of Hexagram 47 is, in my opinion, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So I thought that let's just look at the Chinese original. Yeah, well, this is how I work with the text. I only work with the Chinese original. I hardly ever work with translations. Okay. And in this case, the text from the judgment, I was thought, well, you know, there aren't really any difficult Chinese characters in it. In fact, it could also could be out of a first year textbook. When you're learning Chinese, these characters, most of them are found in the first year that you're studying Chinese. So there's nothing really complicated about it, except for the last sentence, which we'll say a little bit about. But let's just go through the Chinese text and see what it says. I should be able to use my pencil here, if that's going to work. So we just, here we have the name of the hexagram. That's Kun, and that is often translated as exhaustion and oppression. I'm fine with that. And Hung means that the oracle has been accepted, and which also refers to a certain situation that is completed. There is no progress in the situation because the character Hung means, well, you consulted the oracle and with the sacrifice, and the sacrifice has been accepted, which means the character Hung often means that a certain situation has come to a closure. So, but personally, and this may sound like heresy to many people, I tend to ignore these characters like Hung. I also tend to ignore this piece, Wujo, which is often translated as there is no blame. Or more literally, there's no curse from the ancestors. To me personally, these do not contain the essence of the answer. And when I think they don't contain the essence, then I ignore it. And I know there are people who say, well, you must use all parts of the answer. Well, I'm sorry, I found examples of I Ching usage in which they only focused on one or two characters from a complete sentence and they ignored the rest. You are allowed to only work with the parts that really seem important to you. You don't always have to use all words from the text. You have to
So
work with
if
what is
I
essential.
understand you correctly, when there are parts in the sentences or of the oracle that are quite normal, they
Yeah,
to
they
my
are these recurring themes.
recurring themes. Thank you. Then you might ignore them for now.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, you
Okay.
have a
Excellent.
choice.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Perfect.
but that's I must emphasize that that is my way of working with I Ching.
Hmm.
And if you think you should use all parts of a text, then by all means do so.
Okay.
As long as if you give meaning to that which is important to you, then you're good to go.
Yeah.
There isn't really any. You can't go wrong with an oracle like the I Ching.
Oh, of course not.
No. So, but I found
Okay.
this sentence really interesting because it says that the divination, first character John, is auspicious for Darren. Darren, and that's actually these two characters, can have many meanings. It can mean to someone in a high position at the court. Darren is also used in, I think, in the Shijing, used to refer to someone who interprets dreams. So it can have
Hmm.
plenty of meaning, but it also means, especially in modern Chinese, I think, it refers to adults, adult people, grown-up people. Darren,
Okay.
big people, grown-up people. And
Yeah.
so, contrary to children. So Darren is adults, and this answer is auspicious for adults. That is how you could read this line. And I was thinking that's interesting because the situation in itself is not considered auspicious by the person who asked the question. So
No.
this line says it's auspicious for adults, but the situation is inauspicious. Otherwise, you would not have consulted the I Ching. So maybe
Hmm.
she's not behaving like an adult
No. Oh.
because this
Yep.
is auspicious for adults, but the situation is not inauspicious. So it's not auspicious. So in other words, she might be not behaving like adults. And that's part of the
Both.
answer. Why my partner and I fight all the time? Well, because you're not behaving like adults. And that also more or less relates to the upper trigram Lake, because Lake is considered to be a young child, a daughter.
Hmm.
And maybe that is where this idea comes from. I don't know. But I
No.
thought, well, you are not looking at the situation and at these conflicts that you're having, you're not looking at it from an adult point of view. Your point of view is more or less childish. Would you
Yep.
be look at the situation like adults? Then it would be auspicious. Then nothing would be a problem. So that is, I think, part of the answer
Fr-
that they're not looking at it like adults.
From both parts.
Yeah, I think this works for both
Yeah.
parties. Yeah.
Both parts are not looking at their own fears deep inside
No,
Dragon
exactly.
Water.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and that's what I found essential in the judgment text. And the Wuzhou, I can ignore it. I could also say, there is no blame because none of the parties involved are doing anything wrong.
No.
It's not that they deliberately try to let the situation escalate and try to make it worse. It's just how they are in that situation and how they respond in conflict situation. Um, But I think they should realize that it's important to look at the situation and to treat the situation like adults treat the situation. And
Yeah, and
children
according to
often tend
their
to look at the situation and point fingers. Yes, but you do
yeah,
this, no, and you did that. So that's not really helpful. And you have to be more, they have to behave more a little bit like adults. But it's not that they do anything wrong, it's just their way how they respond to situations like this.
perfect. Yes.
But the last line, um, that's also part of the answer, as well, everything is part of the answer, of course. And I know that most translations translate it as that there are words that are not believed. That is what most
Mhm.
translations say. But I made a study of the character Yen, the second character. And what I learned from my research and is actually that this whole sentence means that the words spoken are not sincere. It's not that the listener doesn't believe them. It's that the speaker is not sincere in what it's saying and why it is saying it. And that, of
This
course,
is
is
an
part of the
interesting difference, Harman.
yeah,
Very,
yeah.
yeah.
I know this is quite different from most translations. Sorry about that,
But
but I
no,
can't
but
ignore it.
a
So,
good
and
difference,
I wrote an article about it. Maybe we find a way to link to that article if people want to read more
of
about it.
course.
But
Yeah.
you also have a similar sentence in the fourth line of Hexagram 43, but there it says explicitly talks about listening. That's explicitly mentioned there. You are listening, but the words that you hear, they are not sincere. And that also fits for the larger part the judgment text section 47. There are words that are not sincere. So it applies to the words instead of to the person. Actually, I meant with person, the person who's listening. The words themselves that are being spoken, that these are not sincere. It's not that the listener does not believe them. We have an insincere speaker here instead of an unbelieving listener. And I think this ties into the lower trigram water, which, as you
Mm-hmm,
said
mm-hmm.
several times, has to do with fear and
Yep.
emotion. And when you are approaching a situation through fear, then you are not really working on your honesty, but you're mainly trying to avoid fear. And
Yep.
that can lead
And
to
not
statements that are not really sincere.
yeah, because the heart is constrained. Okay.
Yeah.
This is was hurtful. Water. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
This is
but
too
I
much.
think Trigon Water will also always try to focus on this idea that it is heard by the other party. It will focus on emotions, and that triggers the response that leads to an
Mm.
insincere response to the other person. So, because
Oh, this is an interesting one. Yep.
so, and that is why this, maybe why the judgment text says, in my translation, is that things are being said that are not really sincere, that are not true, that are not based on honesty.
No,
So,
that's not based on honesty because honesty is based on the heart, on the
yes,
trigram fire. Fire is being extinguished in this hexagram big
yes,
time
yes,
in the beginning. But this whole process brings up being truthful to yourself, and that's a potential of it. At least
yes.
that's how I see it. It's not a devastating situation, but
No, definitely not. No, but I think
no,
they need to see how they both approach these clashes that they have, and I'm sure everybody who has a relationship or has past relationship is
yeah,
familiar with clashes every now and
yeah.
then, and how they work out
But this is a
is the
quite deep clash.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
this
how it
is
works
not.
out this depends on how you approach the clash.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a person who is
Uh,
water will treat it completely different from a person who is lake.
oh yes, you're
And that is part of
absolutely
the answer
right.
why my partner and I fight all the time.
Yeah,
So, and that combined with this idea that not always the truth is being spoken,
but
that's
if the partner is the upper trigram, it's a lake, so it's metal. Metal produces water. So I think the person who made the question could also be more open to the person uh, against her partner,
yes,
because there is some interaction going on.
yes,
But it's not a completely wasted situation, but it's difficult situation to get back at your own core and be independent again and become independent. Also stay attached in some way. Do you understand it,
yeah,
Harmon?
yes, yeah, exactly. So, um, well, anyway, that is how I interpret this relatively short and, as far as I'm concerned, quite straightforward text from the I Ching. The only problem, though, is that I had with this judgment text, because we talked about how important images are in the answer from the I Ching, and actually in Chinese oracles in general, they work with images. There isn't really an image in the judgment text. There
Oh,
isn't any cryptic picture in it. And that is often the case in the I Ching. The judgment text hardly contain any images. They're quite straightforward, saying this is good, this is bad. And the advice in this text is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty straightforward. It tells you, well, this is going on. You're not behaving like adults. Were you adults, then this whole situation would not occur. And words are being said that are not really sincere. That's what's happening. Period.
that's pretty, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't contain any images. And I thought, well, it's also, I think, a good idea to look at a case where there are really these cryptic images that most people are struggling with. So um, I thought,
Okay.
let's pretend that this person did receive a moving line. So let's
Mhm.
pretend
Okay.
this person received the fifth line moving. And why the fifth line? I have no idea. I just chose a line from Hexagram 47. So, but these line texts, they really contain images. They really contain pictures. So, and I talked with you about this idea, and fortunately you agreed with it, because let's make it a little bit more difficult for ourselves.
Yeah,
Let's look at
please.
images and how we can interpret that, and how it connects with the hexagram and the trigram, because they do work together. So this is not part of the actual answer, but we're going to pretend that it is. And I looked at several translations of the fifth line. I gathered these together. I'm not sure
Oh,
if all these translations are visible, because I know that Zoom sometimes puts our heads over the sheet, but whatever, we'll see how far we get. Most translations of the fifth line are more or less the same. They talk about nose and feet are being cut off, and the main struggle is actually found with these funny things, the scarlet kneecaps, or as Minford says, crimson robes. This is often where many users of the I Ching struggle with. They say, well, this translation talks about kneecaps, that translation talks about robes. What is it? Well, actually, it doesn't really matter. It's
no,
mainly about
no.
what what idea
No.
do you get from it? What does it? How does it speak to you? You shouldn't only
How
say
does it
look at the
feel?
words. You should try to find out what it is, what kind of feeling it gives you. And I often consult a translation, an English translation, and I read a certain word, and I haven't got a clue what it means. Or when I look at the Chinese text from the I Ching, I read the Chinese character and I think, I have no idea what it means. No idea. And I don't want to look at my dictionary, because I think that should not be necessary. The I Ching
Oh,
will not give me an answer that I can't understand. And it shouldn't be necessary for me to consult a dictionary to find out what the I Ching is trying to tell
no,
me.
Never, never, ever.
No. So even a word, if you don't know what the word means, you still will get some sort of idea out of the context. And that is something that you can work with. Although most users of the I Ching, they lack the confidence to accept that idea, that the I Ching will always give you an answer that you can work with. So they're going to read the commentary. They want to know what these scarlet kneecaps are, Johannes. And if it's a crimson, what color is crimson? I and honestly have no idea, Johannes. But does it matter? No, not really, because this idea of crimson robes, it already gives me this idea because there's talking about about a robe, and I think a robe, that is something that is expensive. That's also it has this idea of something official. I mean, it's not talking about crimson dress. Dress sounds more cheap. Robe sounds expensive. So I think so. And that's how you can work with these words.
Yeah, of course you can work with these words.
Yeah.
Always.
And you should never doubt if you're right about this, because
No, no, no. And this is an important thing. Never ever doubt when your heart says something. This tells me something about the meaning of the hexagram. It's true. It's true
yeah,
for you.
exactly. Yeah.
I must think about a woman I once had in a class, and she wrote it all down wrong down, like young, young, young. It was yin, yin, yin. And the second time she came, half year later, oh, I got it all wrong. I said, but did you get meaningful answers? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you didn't.
No, then
Everything
you
is
didn't do
okay.
anything wrong. You
Yeah,
did it different, but you didn't do it wrong.
yo, and keep it like that.
Yeah,
Bless you.
exactly. You can hardly go wrong with the I Ching, as long
No,
as you have the confidence to trust that you will get the answer that you need.
of course, of
So,
course.
but anyway, this translation, all these translations are more or less the same. They talk either about crimson robes or these scarlet kneecaps. You know, when I read this translation from Rudd, he talks about red girth men. I don't know what girth is, Johannes. I mean, that's a word that's not in my English dictionary. I have no idea what it means. But do I need to know that? No, because
No,
it gives me a certain idea of what it might be, and it gives me an image that I can work with, and that is something that that is important. I do, however, if you permit me the time, Johannes, I want
of
to
course.
talk
Always.
about this translation from Lars Bo Christensen. Because if you would look at all these translations, this one really jumps out because it's completely
Why?
different. And it jumps out, as far as I'm concerned, in a very bad way. It's the worst translation I have ever seen of this sentence. He says that looking frightened, believing the physician will be hard on you. And at first I thought, where on earth does this physician come from? Because when you look at all these other translations, they don't talk about a physician. Where did this physician come from? I mean, looking frightened, I can understand that because these first two characters, about which means cutting off the nose and cutting off the feet, is also
No.
used in certain books about with the meaning of frightened appearance. That's what the Hanyu
Okay.
Datsurjan dictionary says, and I can live with that. By
Okay.
the way, the Hanyu Datsurjan dictionary is one of the main sources for Lars Bo Christensen, and that is
Okay.
exactly what leads
Whatever.
to this error. So anyway, I thought, where does this physician come from? And then I thought, well, let's look at how at his sources. So I thought, let's look at the Hanyu Datsurjan dictionary, and it talks about this phrase. This is these crimson kneecaps or ropes or whatever. And
Yeah.
the Hanyu Datsurjan dictionary actually says that this is these crimson colored cover for the knees. That's what it here says. That's the definition of these two characters. And then it says here, it is
Yeah.
used
Fifth
by
line, eh?
Daifu.
Fifth line.
It's from the fifth line, exactly. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
which this
Okay.
person did not get, but this is hypothetical. So,
Yeah.
but this is about why does Lars Bo Christensen translate it so differently? And the Hanyu Datsurjan says that it is being worn by Daifu. Dafu of Daifu. And Daifu in modern Chinese often refers to a doctor. And that is where Lars Bo Christensen gets his physician from. But as an example, the Xu Jing is being quoted, and in this text, which actually I have to move ourselves aside. Whoopa, there we go. It is translated by most translations. This sentence it's used for officers. That is what the phrase Dafu actually refers to people in a high position.
Yeah.
The fact that Lars Bo Christensen translates it as physician shows to me that his training in Chinese, because he did have official training in Chinese, is mainly centered around modern Chinese, because this is not at all what the Hanyi Da Zhejian is referring to. It's not referring to a physician. It's talking about people in a high place. So, and that also makes the rest of this translation complete nonsense. So I had to get it out of my chest.
Yeah,
This is really
Harman,
stupid translation.
we clearly understood it.
Yes, thank you.
I do not think we will get Christensen on our podcast.
No,
ever again.
he knows how I think about his translation, and that's often.
Okay.
Often when I
stop Harman, stop Harman.
I often read his translation and I think, this isn't translated by someone who translates classical Chinese. Anyway, different topic. Let's go back to the
different topic, but it was something you had to say.
Yeah. Well, my the point why I'm showing all these translations
I
is
love it.
many people think the more translations they use, the better the answer from the I Ching gets. So they're using about 5 to 10 translations and they read them all. And my point is, it doesn't really matter which translation you are using. Every translation can contain the answer. It doesn't, but many people, they doubt the way they work with I Ching, and they doubt even their translation. So they think, well, let's get another translation and look at that text. And that's often more confusing. So, because any book can work as an oracle, even bad I Ching translations can work as an oracle. So the I Ching talks about being tied by ropes. There's another oracle that talks about being tied by ropes, and that's 50 Shades of Grey. Can be a perfect oracle. So any book can work as an oracle. So it doesn't really matter which translation you are using. So that also means that it doesn't really matter how many translations you are using. You can just stick to one if you want. So let's just, for the sake of argument, stick with Wilhelm's translation here. Let's pretend that the lady who asked this question only has Wilhelm's translation. Oh. And then you read the text like his nose and feet are cut off. Now, many people will immediately think, what does that mean? But your first approach should be, what does it say? And what it says is that someone is mutilated. Someone is, because of the nose is being cut off, it's clearly visible when someone's nose is cut off. So you can't smell right. Sure. So one of your senses is being mutilated. Yeah. And also the feet are being cut off. So you're not as mobile as you used to be. So this talks about someone who is not able to approach the situation from all senses. And so the way the situation is approached is actually fairly limited. Because the nose is cut off and the feet are cut off. So it also means that when someone's feet is cut off, they are restricted in their movements. So they're not as flexible. That's one way to look at this sentence. You're not as flexible as you used to be. You're not able to walk around the situation and observe it from all possible angles. So you're stuck to this certain place because your feet are cut off, you can't move. And that is part of the answer why these two people are constantly fighting, because they are not they're not having a complete picture of the situation. They are limited. And then we get to this idea of these purple knee bands. No, I have a whole sheet about the background of these
I
stupid things,
know you
but
have.
let's just put these
Already.
aside because it doesn't really matter what it officially
No,
means.
no,
But when
no.
you read something like purple knee bands and oppression at the hands of the man with the purple knee bands, then you immediately, at least I get this idea of someone who is at a high position. Purple knee bands must have been some sort of symbol.
Of
Um,
course.
so I think, which means that the fact that this is being mentioned means that there are also people who don't have these purple knee bands. Otherwise, it wouldn't be mentioned in the text. So there
Hmm.
are people with purple knee bands and there are people without purple knee bands, which means that they are not equal. And that might be part of the answer why people are now these two people are constantly fighting because they are not equal. There's a person who considers himself higher than the other person and who thinks
Uh,
he can pull on the strings. For instance, this is just my own
uh,
personal interpretation of that sentence.
yeah, I
So
want
even
to
though I
say
don't
something
exactly know
about
what
it. A
these knee
little,
bands
yeah.
are.
I want to say something about that. What I just said in the second and the fifth line of this hexagram, you see both something about the knee bands, and in the second line, there's also talking about the knee bands, a different color, and
Yes,
in the fifth line, you see the purple color. This is extraordinary, of course. Why on the second and the fifth line? Now, of course, they are resonating. But what is exceptional in this hexagram, what she wrote, because she is a lower trigram, and I see the woman as a second line. The outer party, I don't know if it's a woman or a female or a man, I don't know. It doesn't matter. The fifth line is the outer party, and that has the purple bands.
yes.
So there are ministers and kings.
Yes, exactly. And that is
Um,
something that, and I can put that sheet now. Now you mentioned it now anyway, so I can show you. But
okay, okay. Oh, you have it in a sheet.
I have it in sheet. This is a text from the Bai Tong, which actually talks about these strange knee covers, and it says that the Son of Heaven wears vermilion dew knee covers, and the feudal lords red. But this is what the fifth line is talking about, and this here's what the second line is talking about, and this
Yeah,
is
and that's
interesting.
strange, isn't
Yes,
it?
because you would
Because the
expect
fifth, yeah,
the Son of
always the
Heaven with
fifth
the
line,
fifth
that
line.
would be the Son of Heaven.
Yeah,
And he is now on the second line. The king is on the
yes.
second line.
And in the traditional view of the I Ching, the fifth line is the line of the king.
Yeah,
And now, because of these stupid knee covers and the collars that are attached to it, suddenly the king is at the second line, which gives me this idea that the people in the relationship, they don't have the proper positions. They are not treating each other in the position that they have in the relationship, which could
exactly.
mean that, for instance, the woman is not treating the man actually as her husband, but she's treating it as another person, for instance. And the same goes for the man who's treating the woman in a different way that it does not fit their relationship.
And this
So,
comes down to the core nuclear hexagram family. Uh, let the woman be the woman, let the man be the man.
that's exactly that. Yes, and because these because of these knee covers, the second and the fifth line are switched places, which is really
Yeah,
weird.
it's
But
really
that
weird.
can, as you say, it can be part of the answer to the question.
Of course.
So
Yeah, but okay. Yeah, we can talk about this forever.
yeah, but this
Uh,
actually my how I would interpret a text with image, even though I don't really know what every part means. I mainly focus on the parts that I think are essential.
yeah.
So
Thank you very much, Harman.
It's my pleasure. I do
It,
hope this shows our viewers how you can work with text and Hexagram.
I definitely know they do not, but please give us our comments of your comments and
Yes. And
yeah.
I'm curious to know, how do our viewers work with I Ching? What do they find important when they work with I Ching? How do they interpret the answers? And what are their struggles with the I Ching?
Especially the struggles.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. And maybe we can make another podcast about these struggles.
Okay. It was a pleasure again, Harman.
Yes, thank you, Johannes. And have a nice evening, and see you in the next podcast.
Always.
Okay. Bye, Johannes.
Bye.